You're listening to Rudy on the radio, and on the phone right now I have one of my baseball writer heroes, Bill Madden of the Daily News Forever, and now he's just written a book that I have read and thoroughly enjoyed. Of course, my baseball hero since the time I was little was George Thomas Seaver. Bill, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Bill, this actually started as what was going to be a documentary and then ended into the book. Can you tell us a little bit about how that evolved from a documentary to a book?
Yeah, I had a long-standing relationship with Seaver that extended beyond just a writer-player relationship. We became good friends towards the end of his career, and of course beyond after he retired, because we were both wine aficionados. Although Seaver made it a business,
right?
I was just a wine drinker. But anyway, and because of my relationship with him, which really all started back in 1983, when the Mets left him unprotected,
right,
for the free agent compensation draft. This was one of the all-time blunders in history, although they've had a history of blunders, but this was maybe the worst one of all. And I wound up, through a quirk of circumstances, wound up being the guy that told Seaver that he'd been left unprotected and he was going to have to leave the Mets again.
Right.
It's kind of a long story, but
no,
anyway.
But it's in the book, and I loved. I mean, that's one of the good things. You gave us some insights we'd never had before.
Right, and so anyway, I had told my friends about this through the years, and I had a very good friend of mine, Martin Dunn. He was the editor-in-chief of the Daily News for 2 different stints over there, and I was very close with Martin and Terry Thompson, who was the sports editor there for a good period of time. And they were working on various. Martin had left the Daily News and formed his own production company, and they were working on different documentaries. And he came up with this idea that he said, I'd love to do a documentary on Seaver, and in particular your relationship with him. So do you think he said, do you think he would agree to do this? So I said, well, I'll try. I called him, and this was a time when Tom was the dementia that
it started to settle in.
Incurred after his Lyme disease came back 30 years later, after he first contracted it back in Connecticut in the early 90s. It had come back, and it really had affected his mind. And this was around 2015, and he was still good, but he was starting to lose it.
Right.
So I called him, and he said, "Yeah, sure, come on out. I'd love to do it, no problem." So I was pleasantly surprised about that, and so we went out there with the whole camera crew and everything, and this was in 2016, and we shot this documentary. He gave us. We were there for about 2 days out there in Calistoga, where his vineyard was, and we interviewed Tom and Nancy, his wife, and his daughter, and of course, then it went to the Hall of Fame. I interviewed all his Hall of Fame teammates, quote unquote, and Mets people, and we must have had hours and hours of interviews for this documentary. And then what happened was, the second time, we went back a second time in 2017, and I could not believe how he had declined mentally, as far as his memory and everything else. He couldn't even remember any details of his 300th win.
Wow.
The second time we went back there. And I was really alarmed at how much he had declined.
How quickly it happened.
And then, so about a year later was when we had no contact. I had very little contact with him. And about a year later, the family and the Hall of Fame announced that he was suffering from dementia and dropping out of public life. And it was at that point that Martin Dunn said to me, "Billy, you've got to do the book now." I had been reluctant to do a book because I knew I couldn't do one with him because of his memory issues.
Right.
And I didn't feel right about doing a book about him without his permission. And, he was having memory issues that might not even remember that he gave me permission to do it, and things like that. So But at this point in time, Martin said, you got to do this book. You're the only guy that can do this book. You knew him better than anybody. We have all this stuff on tape that we're not going to be able to use in the documentary. You got to do it. So that's how I decided to do the book.
Well, thank you for doing it, because so many of us Met fans and the longtime Seaver fans, there were insights in there, Bill, especially the blunders. And you know what? For being the franchise, the Mets did let him down quite a few times, didn't they?
Yes, they did. And as I point out at the end of the book, he never really fully reconciled with the Mets.
Right.
I mean, we go all the way back to 1977.
Sure.
When he got into the contract dispute with M. Donald Grant.
Mm-hmm. Who's not a we talk about the Wilpons, but those of us who had the 70s, while the Yankees are becoming superpowers, M. Donald Grant keeps telling us that, we got the horses here. Yeah,
right. Well, M. Donald Grant was the patrician chairman, as I call him in the
right.
book. It was really, that was probably the ugliest period in the Mets history, when M. Donald Grant was the chairman of the team. He wouldn't get involved in free agency. He was a cheapskate as far as,
right.
People think the Wilpons were bad.
No.
This was the worst, because he wouldn't sign free agent.
He didn't believe in it, right?
And that's why he and Seaver got into, on top of the fact that Seaver was having his own contract dispute, he was hammering Grant in the papers for his refusal to improve the team. And so that was the beginning. Of course, they traded him to the Reds.
Right.
That was the first real fissure between Seaver and the Mets. And it somewhat got healed when Frank Cashin brought him back.
Right, in 83.
5 years later, when his contract was coming to an end with the Reds, and the Reds didn't really want to pay him what he was supposed to be, what he was being paid. And Cashin called Bob Howsam, the president of the Reds, and he said, look, I'd like to bring Seaver back here. You guys really don't need him. The Reds were in decline then.
Yeah, they were going to rebuild, right.
And so they made this deal, and they brought Seaver back to New York amid gala.
I was one of them.
And he was there 1 year in 83, and that's when they left him unprotected in this free agent compensation draft, thinking that
nobody would take him, right?
That they would never take him. And so that was the second fissure. And then, of course, when Seaver... And Seaver really never forgot both of those things, even though he said publicly,
sure,
it was water over the dam, and he was not holding any grudges. But the final straw for him was when they opened up Citi Field and they brought him back to throw out the first pitch at Citi Field to Mike Piazza. And I got this from a real good friend of his. The scene is in the book. They're walking into Seaver and his friend. They're walking into Citi Field for the first time, and they walk into that rotunda, the Jackie Robinson rotunda.
Right.
And Seaver's looking all around the place. First of all, there's no statue of Seaver.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Seaver was keenly aware of the fact that all these new ballparks that had opened up since Camden Yards 25 years ago, Pittsburgh and St. Louis.
Sure. They have statues of their icons, their heroes.
Part of the ballparks was the statues that they put in front of the ballparks of their most famous players and franchise players. And of course, there was nothing at Citi Field. So he walks in and he sees all this Brooklyn Dodgers.
It was like a monument to the Dodgers.
And he said to his friend, he said, I realized that Jackie Robinson was a great player, a Hall of Famer, and a groundbreaking player, but I don't recall him ever playing for the Mets. And he just a subtle little remark like that. And his friend said to me, he said, you have no idea how truly upset Seaver was over the fact that the Mets didn't even have the Hall of Fame room.
When they opened up it, and the outfield wall was black, and there was no blue and orange. I mean, it was a disappointment to true Met fans, no doubt.
Yep. So he always felt that the Mets never really appreciated him the way he should have been appreciated. And so when they named the street after him, and they had the street naming ceremony, he was too far gone.
It was too late, yeah.
That ceremony, but and they talk about putting the statue up, but it's too late.
Yeah. Oh, I remember the talk. They're saying, why are they going to wait until he passed? And then, unfortunately, that's what happened, right?
Yep. Well, no, I mean they didn't know he was going to die.
No, I know, but they just never got around to it, and it was. I blame this on Jeff Wilpon and Fred Wilpon. And Fred is a dear friend of mine, but they just were so short-sighted when it came to Seaver, and really when it came to the history of their
own
team. Mm-hmm.
They never really took their own Hall of Fame very seriously.
Right.
Whereas the Yankees, they have Monument Park out there, and Seaver told me that once. I think the quote is in the book. He said the difference between the Yankees and the Mets is the Yankees understand and fully appreciate their own history, and the Mets do not.
No, that's true.
I'll tell you a story. I sent a copy of the book to Steve Cohen.
Okay.
And I put a note with it. I said, consider this a primer on how not to run the New York Mets.
Absolutely. Here, can I ask you about this one, Bill? Because you had mentioned that Frank Cashin was trying to get Seaver back, and when I read that, it just frustrated me because how awesome would it have been if Seaver was in the other dugout in '86 exactly, and Davey Johnson had kiboshed that.
Yeah, well, here's what happened on that, and this is another part of my relationship with him. I was right in the middle of the after I was the one that told him he was going to have to go to the White Sox and everything. He finally got that resolved because he didn't really want to go there.
Sure,
but he had an acrimonious first couple of meetings with Jerry Reinsdorf.
Yeah, that's great in the book.
Anyway, it's 2 years later now. He's accomplished everything he needed to accomplish. He got his 300th win in Chicago in 1985, and now it's 1986. The White Sox are going backwards.
Right.
And Seaver's career is coming to an end, and he is really kind of lonely and miserable out there in Chicago. It's a wasted situation for him out there, and he desperately wanted to come home to New York and finish his career in New York. So he gave me a call one day. It was sometime around April or May, maybe a little later. I think it was June of 75 because of June of 86 because the trading deadline was coming up.
Right.
And he said to me, I need a favor. He said, I would love to come back and finish my career in New York. And Kenny Harrelson, the White Sox GM, is very obliging on this thing. But he called the Mets, and Frank really wanted to do the deal. He wanted to bring me back, but Davey Johnson overruled him. Well, not overruled him. He said he didn't want him there. And at the time, you have to remember, the Mets had a full pitching staff. They had Dwight Gooden. They had
you're right.
They had Sid Fernandez, Bobby Ojeda, and they were on their way to the World Series with the best pitching staff in baseball. And I guess Davey just thought that Seaver would be, first of all, he would be excess, to say the least. He didn't know if he'd have a place for him to pitch in the rotation. And he just didn't think it was going to be a good mix, and he was afraid of, he was afraid of there might be even a chemistry problem with Seaver, although, most of Seaver's teammates, especially the pitchers, will tell you that they idolized him.
Sure.
And he was very helpful to everywhere he went. Anyway, so Davey put the kibosh on it.
Yeah.
And then, so Seaver's calling me now, and he said, can you do me a favor? Could you call Steinbrenner for me and tell him that I would love to come back and finish my career with the Yankees? So I said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. So, in fact, I said to him, I said, I got to tell you, Tom, I said, I can't imagine he would not be really all in on this one. This is right out of the George Handbook.
Exactly, because it would have been,
playbook. To upstage the Mets on the way to the World Series by bringing Tom Seaver back to New York as a Yankee.
Right.
But I I was really surprised when I called George, and he was only lukewarm to the idea. And to make a long story short, George starts telling me about how Harrelson's insisting that the player he gets back in his deal is a shortstop named Carlos Martinez. He was a 6'6" shortstop who everybody thought he would never. He was too big for shortstop anyway. He was going to have to move to first base or third base. And anyway, but George was bound in that he was not going to give this guy up. And I said, George, we're talking Tom Seaver here. Yeah. What are you thinking about? I mean, Carlos Martinez, nobody even knows that this guy's going to make it. Oh, no, I don't know if I can give this guy up. And so I call Harrelson back, and I said, look, I don't know what's going on here, but I can't believe that George is being so reluctant on this thing. And meanwhile, I'm saying to myself, what am I doing in the middle of this trade? I'm just a writer. I'm talking to Harrelson. I'm talking to Steinbrenner. I'm trying to make this trade for Seaver and do Seaver a favor and get him back to the Yankees.
Sure.
So the deal wound up being hung up on George
Carlos Martinez.
And they wound up trading him to Boston, and that's how he wound up in the opposing dugout for the '86 World Series.
Yeah, which is, again, ironic because, the fans, they were welcoming Lee Mazzilli back in '86. I just can't imagine the fans not being a great win for everyone, but having Seaver in '86 also.
Yeah, it would have been great, but
right.
The Mets didn't want him.
Yeah.
Davey didn't want him, and so
he
wasn't going to overrule his manager, and he was really doing it as a favor to himself, I think, because he felt so badly about having left him unprotected 3 years earlier.
Back to the question of Seaver. What I loved about Tom Seaver, now I was in my Little League glory when he came on the scene, and I was frustrated by everybody loving this lovable loser thing because we were kids and we wanted to win, and Seaver comes on the scene and changes everything in 1967, doesn't he?
He absolutely changed the culture. Of course, he'd been a winner all his life, Little League back in Fresno, and then, of course, USC when he pitched for Rod Dato, the legendary Southern Cal coach who won 3 or 4 national championships. And so he'd never been on losing teams his entire life. And so he arrives on the scene in 1967, his rookie season with the Mets. And the writers at the time were, they'd been covering the team since '62, their inception. And, of course, most of that time, Casey Stengel had been the manager. He was replaced in '66 with Wes Westrom, who was the total opposite of Stengel. And in that, Westrom was this bland, dull guy. Was not a quote master the way old Casey was. And the team was still bad. Maybe even worse. And so the writers reverted to always quoting Casey in their stories and talking about how the Mets were still lovable losers and Rod Keneal and Marvelous Marv, Choo Coleman. These guys had become legendary baseball players in New York by this time, but for the wrong reason. Seaver comes in this clubhouse and he's he's reading what these writers are writing every day, listening to the the conferences they'll have with Westrom, and they'll say, by the way, you know what Casey once said, and things like this. And Seaver finally, at one point, he was talking to Swoboda, who was a fellow rookie. And he said, I don't know about you, Ronnie, but he says, I don't get all this stuff about the lovable losers. We had nothing to do with this. And I don't understand this. He says, I don't want any part of this. And I guess he said it to a few people in the clubhouse, and the writers picked up on it, and they realized that this guy means business here. He wants no part of this, and maybe we should start looking at Seaver and these new people that are slowly coming in here and start writing about that. Of course, they needed to start winning as well. And they didn't win in '67, and then they didn't win in '68 when they brought Gil Hodges in. But talk Gil a little Hodges bit, changing the culture
right. There. Gil and Seaver were not only did they bring change to the Mets, but that relationship was something that Tom never forgot.
Yeah, well, that was it. I mean, he liked Westrom, but he realized that Westrom was just a placeholder there.
Right.
And when Gil Hodges became available down in Washington, he was, an all-time New York hero with the Dodgers, and he was a man with a presence about him. And when he came in there, Seaver realized that as much as he'd talked about wanting to change the culture here, now the culture was going to change, because he could see right away. They were both fellow Marines. Seaver, of course, had been in the Marine Reserves after he got out of college, which has transformed him into a professional baseball player, because he went into the Marine Corps Reserves. He was 5'9", 160 when he went in, and 6 months later he came out of the Marines 6'1", 210. It's what I say in the book was a miracle grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, he immediately bonded with Hodges, and he saw what Hodges was going to bring to this team, and that's what happened. In '68, they were greatly improved.
No doubt, there was a whole different feel for us fans. Even that we knew that the times were changing for the better.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and then comes '69, and what a time to be alive as a New York fan. The Mets win, the Jets win, the Knicks win. You think it's going to be this way the rest of your life, and then you realize, wow, it wasn't. But what a ride '69 was. And when it comes to Tom Seaver, what I loved about Tom, and you could speak to this, is that he was not just a thrower. So many of the pitchers today are just throwing. He was cerebral in every way, shape, and form.
No, he was a student of the game, and a student of pitching. He said to me on more than one occasion, he said, I was an artist out there.
Absolutely.
And he was.
Yeah.
The best story I can tell you about that was a story I got from Tom Hume, who was a relief pitcher with the Reds when Seaver went over there. He was actually their closer when Seaver went over there. But he was a kid out of Cincinnati. He grew up in Cincinnati. He had never seen the world, so to speak. Cincinnati, Ohio had been his entire life. And when Seaver got there, he took Hume under his wing, and right away when Hume saw Seaver sitting in front of his locker doing the New York Times crossword puzzle in ink, by the way, he knew that this guy was something different. He was more than just a great pitcher. He was a cerebral guy who was probably one of the smartest players he was ever going to be associated with. And Seaver took him under his wing. He took him to art museums and on the road. He taught him how to play bridge, and he included him in the bridge games on the team flights, things like that. But he also taught him about pitching.
Right.
And the strategy of pitching, and knowing which pitch you're going to use at which point in time in the game, and how to conserve your pitches so that you can, don't waste a lot of pitches on the number 9 hitter, things like that. And Hume's quote to me was, he says, the thing I learned about Seaver was, that really amazed me, was he was always pitching, he was always thinking 2 pitches ahead on every batter. And the example of that I later got from Tony La Russa. When Seaver was with the White Sox, La Russa told me this story. They were playing against, I can't remember the team. No, he couldn't remember the team, but he said there was a Seaver. It was late in the game, and there were runners on first and third, and there was 2 outs in the game, and a really dangerous left-handed hitter is coming up, and Seaver had just walked the previous batter. And La Russa starts out to the mound, and Seaver immediately waves him off. He says, "Don't worry, I got this guy." Seaver had, as La Russa said, I had a left-hander warming up in the bullpen. It was the time to take him out, but Seaver waves me off. He says, "Don't worry, I got this guy." So La Russa makes an about face. He starts walking back to the dugout, and Seaver yells at him, But just so you know, I'm going to deliberately fall behind in the count, and then I'm going to have him pop the ball up to third base."
And that's exactly what happened, right?
Goes and he sits down. Seaver falls behind in the count, 2-0. the left-handed hitters at the plate. Now he's digging in. He's waiting for that fastball.
That fastball.
Seaver throws him a changeup, and he pops it up to the third baseman.
I love that story. I love it because it's so. And I've had a chance to have Jerry Grody on my show. Seaver had some great catchers. I mean, he had Grody, Bench, and Fisk, and you can't go wrong with that trio.
No, he had probably, certainly two of the greatest catchers in history, in Fisk and
Bench.
Grody was probably one of the best defensive catchers and handler of pitchers in baseball.
Yeah, and they would always talk about through the batters, and that's something I wish. I tried to teach it when I was coaching. Matter of fact, Bill, I was teaching the drop and drive to students, and then basically the high school system told me not to do that anymore. You know,
wow,
they did. They said we don't want our pitchers doing it, and because drop and drive was the way I learned. And they'll talk the Mets when they found out, and when I found out, I was crushed because I thought heroes never died, and losing Seaver and how the Mets pay tribute to him was pretty cool. What they did. Tell us about what they did.
Oh yeah, as far as when the pitchers all had the dirt on their knee.
The dirt on their knee. Yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
Well, thank you. The book is, of course, Tom Seaver, A Terrific Life. He will always be Tom Terrific, no matter what some other quarterback might say. Bill Madden, it's a bestseller. It's absolutely incredible. You can get it just about anywhere, and it means a lot to have a few minutes with you because everybody has heroes, and Seaver was my first hero, and will always be that. And Bill, thanks for bringing it to life. There's things in the books that you won't know, and I highly recommend it. And thanks, Bill, for giving it to us.
Oh, that was my pleasure. I will say this: of all the books that I've written, this was the most personal of all of them. Steinbrenner was a labor of labor. This was a labor of love.
Well, it's got to mean something to you when Seaver says, "I'll only talk to Madden. I'll only talk to Bill," right?
That was kind of neat.
Yeah,
I will say that.
Is there another project in the making, or something we can look forward to, or you just kind of seeing what's going on these days?
Know. I thought my 1954, which I wrote back in 2004, I thought that was going to be my last book. And then all of a sudden, the Seaver book, as I've told you earlier, came out of nowhere. So you never know.
No, but thank you. Absolutely. Bill Madden, Hall of Fame author himself, writing the book, Tom Seaver. Thanks for being with us today. It means a lot, Bill. Blessings. God bless. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Bill. Thank you again for everything. I appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, sir.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.